Hi, this video is to help you prepare your narrative speech. Your narrative speech is going to be sharing with the class about a cultural artifact. And to prepare for that, first I want to talk a little bit about culture and what culture means. Culture is defined as the attitudes and behavior characteristics of a particular social group. We all are part of many social groups, and when we meet someone for the first time, some of their social associations and cultures are fairly obvious. Let's start with me for an example. If we were in a face-to-face class when you arrived on the first day, some of my social associations would be obvious. I'm a part of white culture. I'm American. You'd probably guess I live in the suburbs, and by talking to me, you'd guess I'm a Texan. These are all part of my cultural associations. But what about the social groups I'm a part of that are less obvious? After talking to me for a while, I might share with you that I have 2 cats and 2 dogs. Some people might call this a pet mom. That's a cultural group for which I'm associated. I also love wine and trying new foods. There are cultural associations for foodies like me. But culture is much more than just our age, the color of our skin, and what we like to eat or drink. There's also expressions of values, beliefs, attitudes. These are aspects of culture that are harder to define. This short poem explains it well. Cultural differences are the moments of discomfort or misunderstanding when people from different cultures interact. It's often the result of below-the-surface differences in values, traditions, or beliefs. This iceberg is a good example. There's things that are visible, and then there's the invisible things that sometimes cause friction between different cultural groups. At this point, you might be thinking, this is all kind of interesting, but what does it have to do with my public speaking class? The answer is that culture relates to how we communicate. Understanding who you are, both the visible and the less visible parts of your background and the cultures you belong to, helps you communicate more effectively and understand what makes you tick. Understanding that each of us is a part of many cultural groups also helps you recognize the uniqueness of each person you meet. When you're creating a speech, you need to consider your audience. No audience member will be exactly like you in their race, background, preferences, beliefs, and values. Understanding culture and how many cultures are a part of each person enables us to view each other as unique individuals, and we're less likely to fall into the trap of stereotyping each other. So up to now, we've talked about what culture means and acknowledged that we're each a part of many different cultures. When you're thinking about this assignment, please keep this in mind. I want us to start talking about cultural artifacts because that's going to be the focus of your speech. Within each culture, there are many human-made objects or artifacts that hold deep symbolic importance. These artifacts might represent an important historical event, reflect value, be part of an important ritual or tradition, or serve as a reminder of a key part of life within a certain culture. In the picture, we have some Somalian artifacts. These are hand-woven baskets and hand-cut items that are significant and important to the traditions and the history of the Somali people. Baskets like these, or arrowheads like you see in the picture above, might be something that we think of commonly when it comes to artifacts, things that might be in a museum or that an archaeologist might dig up. And those are valuable, but there's also many common day artifacts that you may not think of as significant, but they do tell a story about a people and their history and their values. Now let's look at something you might not think of as an artifact, but it does tell a story. Here we have a New York Yankees jersey. Is this an artifact? Well, it's human-made, and it does hold symbolic importance to some people. It represents their history and could be tied to local or family traditions, as well as the region of the country that they're from. It's important to note that not all physical items are cultural artifacts. A cultural artifact needs to be human-made. This shell is a good example. It might be special to you. Maybe you found it on the beach and have kept it ever since. However, if an archaeologist found it 100 years from now, it would not tell a human story because it's not human-made. However, a naturally occurring item that has been changed and altered could be a cultural artifact. This necklace is a good example. The cultural artifact you choose for this speech should tell a story. It should tell a story about you, your day-to-day life, and what you value. These two shoes are a good example of the stories cultural artifacts can tell. By looking at them, you can infer things about the person who owns them. You get indications about the type of work they do, maybe their gender, and also potentially about their values. If the army boot was used for a cultural artifact speech, it could tell a story about a sense of duty, about love for the outdoors, or national pride. While both of these are shoes, the green heels would tell a very different story about the person who wore them. Cultural artifacts also tell us about a period in time. They showcase the resources, abilities, and technology of a specific culture and time. For this speech, you're going to choose an artifact that helps tell a story about the culture you live in and its values and beliefs. It needs to be a human-made item that you can bring to your speech and show to your audience. You will be giving a narrative speech. This is an informative speech that tells a personal story. The purpose of the speech is to help the audience learn more about you and hopefully relate to you on a personal level. Communication is a participatory process. It's not just about you speaking, it's about the audience listening. So what are you going to do to make sure that your speech reaches your audience and you can build those connections and that shared sense of understanding? First, we need to think about your audience and try and analyze them and their needs. Read through this list of questions you can ask yourself after you've chosen your artifact. Your audience is your classmates, so think about what you've observed about the students in this course. What have they said in discussions that gave you an indication about their life experience and their attitudes? Do you think your artifact is going to be something your audience has seen before? If it's not, you might need to give them more basic details so they can develop a good understanding. If it's very familiar to them, then you may have to work hard to hold their interest. Your story about this item needs to stand out. Let's look at 3 examples of students and the cultural artifacts they chose. Our first example is Eric. He's a Mexican-American student who chose an autographed photo of Hugo Sanchez for his artifact. This is a great choice, but he probably wants to make sure that he personalizes his story and really makes it unique to him. Otherwise, it would be easy for the audience to shut down and think, oh, this is just another story about a guy who loves soccer. We've seen this before. Our next example is Savannah. She's got this unusual looking wooden thing that she was left by her grandmother. The audience is probably not going to be familiar with this item, so she should probably spend some time talking about what it is, the history of the item, and how it works. Her item actually moves when candles are put in it. The smoke from the candles spins the center fan. So it wouldn't be a bad idea for her to actually demonstrate how it works because people will be curious, and that should only take a few seconds. Our last example is Nora. She's got this toy, it's called a Furby, that she was given as a child in the 1990s. Because this toy is tied to a very specific time in history, she might want to talk a little bit about the 1990s and give information to the audience about how popular the toy was, what it cost, maybe even the specific values of pop culture in that decade. The last thing I want to do is just remind you the purpose of this speech is to learn more about each other and the cultures represented in our classrooms. We want to gain practice developing a speech, sharing about ourselves, but we also want to break down stereotypes of difference and learn to see people as individuals. So use this speech as an opportunity to share things about yourself that might be unexpected, and as a listener, embrace this opportunity to really see people and hear from them what they value, who they are, what their culture is.